Hey everyone, welcome. This is the ESOP guy, and we are on a journey to an ESOP. This season is season 5, so we're calling it Journey to an ESOP and Beyond. Very excited to go through this topic today because one of the things that we do run into throughout the ESOP community, there are multiple resources for folks to get information. Of course, the podcast is here, but there are other resources that I think are really helpful. And so part of our job in educating people about ESOPs is really to kind of educate them about the resources that exist in the community. And so today we're going to get to talk to Steve Storkan, who is the executive director of EOX, and really understand what their resource is and how they fit into all of the different resources that are available to companies to really consider and help them understand employee stock ownership plans. So with all that, Steve, welcome to our podcast for the first time.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Being fun to talk.
Cool. So, Steve, can you tell us a little bit about, like, first off, how you got into the ESOP world? I mean, a lot of companies and individuals, they got into ESOPs in different ways. How did you get started?
Yeah, I think we all stumbled into this. I don't know anybody who came into the ESOP arena knowing what they were getting into. I spent 23 years or so as a third-party administrator in the Midwest. I was headquartered out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And by the time I was done, we had about 50 ESOPs that we were the third-party administrator for. But my main role, besides running the third-party administration group where we had 5 or 6 employees, was we were inside of the banking channel. So I started my own small business as a third-party administrator. We were purchased by a regional bank, and then that was purchased by another one. And so my career, I spent a lot of my career in the banking channel. And what I was doing was I was going alongside the trusted advisor. So the bankers who had clients, business clients, so many, as you know, so many business clients depend on a trusted advisor, whether that be an attorney, a CPA, or their banker. And so I was the guy that they would take out and say, hey, this is Steve. He'll tell you about ESOPs. If you're ever interested in an exit plan or even a business growth tool, let him tell you about it. And oh, by the way, our bank does a lot of ESOP work. We lend, we do third-party administration. So I spent a ton of time doing that. Fell absolutely in love with the first ESOP I ever came encountered with in 1996. Became deeply involved in the Minnesota Dakota's chapter of the ESOP Association as a volunteer. And just, yeah, employee ownership has been my life for the last, well, we're almost at 30 years now. So
Wow.
loved every minute of it too.
It goes fast, doesn't it?
It goes fast. Yeah, it goes way too fast.
Yeah. As we get started, real quick, one of the things I like to do is we invite people into the podcast is, like, tell us your favorite movie and why.
Yeah, my favorite movie, I can't think of the last time I went to a movie theater, so I don't have an answer for that. I think my wife wants me to say it's the Barbie movie, but I'm not going to
No,
admit that I've
no.
seen it because I
Sorry.
have not seen it yet. She continues to try to get me to see it, but I think I'm more of a series guy. I guess the thing I can think of the last great movie per se is the Yellowstone series that really got me sucked in. I believe
A lot of
Yellowstone.
people
No,
are
it
going to be
wasn't necessary. It could have been should have been a movie, but yeah, the Yellowstone series has got me hooked. So that's
pretty cool.
probably me.
Awesome. Great. Well, so as you started out your career in ESOPs, the EOX, as you sit there and think about, like, what is EOX, and then how did you get involved in starting up this organization?
Yeah, so EOX stands for the Employee Ownership Expansion Network. It was an idea inside of the National Center for Employee Ownership, so an idea inside of NCEO. I was working obviously very closely with NCEO and ESOP Association, that whole entire world, but I had no idea that this was going on inside of NCEO. And so between Lauren and Corey and Tim and all the folks at NCEO, they established a task force. And the task force mission was to find out, why is it that Vermont and Ohio have the highest per capita concentration of ESOPs, or some of the highest, if not the highest, and they just happen to have the longest standing state centers for employee ownership? There has to be a connection there. And if there is a connection there, how do we make sure that we can create more than 7 state centers for employee ownership? Because back then in 2014, 15, there were only 7 state centers. And so that task force was put together to figure that out. And the first thing they did was, first of all, they realized, yes, state centers are vital to this. And then secondly, they established the Pennsylvania Center for Employee Ownership. So a couple of people on the task force were from the Philadelphia area. They started, Jim Steicher and Ken Baker helped start the Pennsylvania Center, brought employee-owned companies together with service providers to get funding. NCEO had a bit to do with that, and they started the Pennsylvania Center and just decided, let's see what this is. How do we start a state center? What should a state center do? And from there, I can get into more history of what that was, but that was really the start of EOX. EOX did not exist at that time. It was inside of the NCEO.
That's pretty cool. Like, that's exciting that they would see a need and then just say, you know what, we're going to branch out and have that need met. One of the statistics that floats around is like how many ESOP companies are in the country. I kind of always tell people it's about 7,000. I don't know if that's more or less right now. What would you say, like how many actual ESOP companies are there right now in the United States?
They go back and forth. I think the latest data that I've seen is, somewhere in that 6,400, 6,300
Even less,
goes,
even.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
and what's shocking about that, I think hopefully it is shocking to people, like, millions of businesses all over the country, right, that could be an ESOP, aren't, right? So it's a very small fraction of what really could exist. And I think what is interesting about what you said too is we have concentrations in different states like Ohio and Vermont. And it's gotta be like intuitively because those states are educating people.
exactly. Yeah. And I did the math once for a presentation, and my math says that 0.01%, not point 0.1, but 0.01% of all businesses that have more than one employee, so all non-sole proprietorships, 0.01% of them are ESOPs, which is just absolutely crazy to me. You've been in the business a long time, I have, and we think of this as this wonderful, and it is a wonderful community, and everybody does this, and we are such a small, little, minute part of the business world, which is unfortunate. But
Mhm.
it's also why EOX and the State Center Network exists. I am convinced that the number one reason that there aren't more ESOPs or more employee-owned companies is the lack of education and outreach and the myths around them. So both the education and the wrong education. And that's what EOX was created to do. So that task force inside of NCEO, they saw the success of the Pennsylvania Center. They saw a big opportunity, and that task force ended up forming, its own nonprofit, July 4th of 2018, in our country's birthplace. It wasn't a coincidence. It was July 4th in Philadelphia. We incorporated, and then I was hired on January 1st of 2019, and I was drawn to the organization. One, I was looking for a change, been a long time as a third-party administrator, but it was just this new challenge and really letting me do what I love to do, which is preach the gospel of employee ownership and do it across the entire country.
Yeah.
So it's been 5 years now. We hit our 5th-year anniversary of my hire anyway, a couple weeks ago on January 1st of 2024. And at this point today, as we speak, there are 21 state centers across the country. We've helped to open, you take the 7 that started, add Pennsylvania, you get 8. And in the 5 years, EOX has helped to open 13 other state centers across the country. So we've
Wow.
made some significant progress even during COVID. So I'm pretty proud of that.
That's a lot of, yeah, that's a lot of work. I mean, and a lot done in a few years, really. Only 5 years goes by. We all know it goes by very fast.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and I want to talk about like exactly what EOX state centers do. Let me ask you, like, if somebody just comes right off you meet them in an elevator or you meet them at somewhere and they're like, hey, why should I even be an ESOP? What would you say? What would be your answer to that question?
So from a business owner standpoint, I always start with the legacy side of it. Legacy might be overused word. I met with a business owner and used that, and he said, "Oh, that's BS." I just, you're using the wrong word. I understand what you're saying, but you're using the wrong word. And so I haven't come up with a better word. But to me, legacy is the word. Um, a business owner who wants to keep what he and his business partners, his wife, her husband, maybe their grandparents or their parents, it's been built. It's something that they have put their heart and soul into. And I would submit that 99% of business owners care about what happened to that, especially the ones that are in the exit planning stage right now. If you think about businesses that were created a while ago that even are in first generation, but second, third generation, they weren't thinking about starting a business, scaling it up, selling it, going and doing something new. That wasn't a concept as far as I know. So
Sure.
all of these business owners, that's what I tell them. employee ownership and ESOPs are a way for you to ensure that what you built, if you built a good company and you have a good management team, that what you built can almost be guaranteed that it will continue and probably will be improved because you've given the keys to your employees. So here you built this great thing. It can be improved, and you can look back 5, 10, 15 years and go, you know what? Johnson Manufacturing still looks like Johnson Manufacturing. Quick story. I had a woman in Wisconsin when I was back doing my job as a third-party administrator with one of my bankers. She was just beside herself that if they sold their business, she wanted to be able to still come to that small community during the summer. They'd winter in Florida, but she couldn't imagine coming back to that community if she had sold to somebody else who would close the plant. She said, I couldn't even go to the grocery store. I'm sure people would be talking behind my back, like, well, they got millions and look what they did to our community. So I never forget that. That was early in my career. I never forget that story. And I share that story with business owners all the time. I think it resonates.
Yeah, no, that's a really good story, because that's really what happens is people are considering the opportunities they have. And I think when people really start to dive into what they want to get out of selling their company, one aspect of that is going to be the multiple or the valuation, right? But
Right.
for most people, it's really not the whole thing, especially if they've accumulated wealth, and a lot of people I work with are going to just say, look, it's not the most, of course it's important, but it's not the most important thing, but taking care of my community, my people, building the consistency with my culture and knowing my employees don't have this huge disruption of what's going to happen next. There's a lot of good reasons, but I like that question for you and for all of us to say, because that's something that when people listen to this, they're thinking like, well, why should I even do this? What's the truth, behind it all?
And I think the other, I think a lot of times we lead with tax benefits as well. And that's the second thing for me is I just say, look, all that stuff I just told you about, legacy, exiting on your own. We didn't even talk about that, exiting on your own timeline, not selling 100% of it. I mean, all of that goes with that kind of special type of sale. Then we can start talking about tax benefits. And oh, by the way, there are these tax benefits to you, tax benefits to the company. I think a lot of times people lead with the tax benefits or lead with the details. We got to lead with the story, the feel good. And some people will just be like, no, that's not me. I want the highest valuation. I just want to get out. Although I tell you, I talked to somebody yesterday, husband and wife, who kind of came into the conversation thinking, how can I get my son involved in the business? How can I have a couple of key managers? And maybe we'll just sell because my son can go off and do something else. By the time we were done telling that story, we're going to talk again. So it was a successful call where you kind of lead with that. Let's dig into what you really want to do with this. What's important to you? And it wasn't the valuation.
No.
And I think we think it is. And very rarely is it the valuation.
We don't. Yeah, I mean, we do think it. Sometimes people think it is, especially because there's a similarity with ESOP transactions and M&A transactions. And people ask me like, should I do this or that? I'm like, if you're really geared towards a highest multiple, then go towards an M&A transaction. But ESOPs are like, they get convoluted. Like people start getting like wrapped up in it. In my opinion, it's apples and oranges, because you're going to accomplish different things with an ESOP. You might accomplish some of the same things, but they're going to be different. And you need to know what you really want at the end of the day. And maybe you do discover that on your journey to whatever direction you go. But typically I find it's not like, let me run 2 parallel paths and I'll take the best option. I'm really going to go for an ESOP because I've done my homework,
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, employee ownership is not on the table. That's the biggest issue in my mind, is that people know about M&A, they know about transfer to a family member, they know about third-party sale, whether M&A or not, but just they know all of those. We need employee ownership to be in the room where it happens. To go back to a Hamilton reference, that we need it to be in a room where we need to be in the room where it happens. We have to be able to at least give them that option, and we're not even in the same block most of the time.
I know, you're right. And I think partly too, it's in the resource, and I'm going to segue into the EOX, because the resources that people listen to, we all know that there is a lot of money to be made in the M&A world. And I think there's still, with the ESOP world too, as we differentiate between who is telling you what, you have to peel it back and ask the question, like, who is telling me this? And I know, like, for
Yes.
you guys, and this is really the mission on the podcast, is to be completely unbiased. Like, this is like trying to be like, this is the absolute place where we can just say, this is information you can rely on. So with that, EOX is really a place where, you guys educate people, right? And these different state centers on they're thinking about being an ESOP. How do you guys keep yourself unbiased? I guess that's the question, and talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, so EOX, our mission is to significantly expand employee ownership by creating and supporting a network of state centers. So our main mission, while I do a lot of meetings like I did yesterday with business owners who call me that see something, somehow get hold of me. My main mission is to make sure that a state center is created, that I help it get up and launched faster than they could do on their own. Get them all best practices and create a network so we can all have share best practices. And those best practices are in two different ways. I talk about the hub and spoke. The state centers are a hub. First of all, they're a hub for outreach and education. We go where service providers and others in the employee ownership sphere may not be welcomed, which would be an economic development conference, a Chamber of Commerce conference, or a Chamber of Commerce meeting, a trade association, anywhere that we can go where there's a built-in audience. We will go talk to 5,000 people about all three forms of employee ownership: ESOPs, worker cooperatives, and employee ownership trusts. And so each of the 13 centers that are under us, and they're all independent, but as a network that we helped create, we take a lot of great care of them. All of them have a focus, first of all, on outreach and education. And whenever they then run into someone who knows a business owner, or there is a business owner that then contacts them or that they can get a connection with, they become the second hub, which is the hub for resources. So they come into a state center, they do an intake with the state center director, a consultation. And it's at that point during a 45-minute, hour-long conversation, we gather all of the information that we think we need to help them on their journey, so that when they do get connected to the resource, and the state center will try to connect them with a local resource. So if they go to the Minnesota Center, we've got a group of 20 or so service providers that have been supportive of us, that we trust, that we know will do a great job. We try to keep that Minnesota company working with Minnesota service providers. Now, we also have a national network. So we have this whole network that they can connect them to those resources. But we're not just going to say, here's all the resources. We know by the end of that conversation path that they probably should go on. They're asking a lot about the valuation of a company. How is my company going to be valued? Do you have any idea what my company is worth? If that's all they talk about, well, sending them to an ESOP attorney to talk about the transaction isn't going to get us down the road very far. So why don't we send them to a couple of the ESOP valuation firms that we know, let them choose which of the firms they want to work with, and then stay with them. And that's the other thing that a state center does. They're not going to be the quarterback of a deal. They're not going to be the investment banker. They just are going to be there to make sure that that business owner is being taken care of, and can ask questions that they may not ask of a service provider because they think it's a dumb question, or maybe they're questioning what a service provider says to them, or why is he talking about this? Why is she telling me this? So it's really taking them from beginning to end to try to make sure that we can have a successful transaction.
Yep. I think that's important. And finding information like that, I know for people is hard sometimes because they're reading through, a lot of, there's a lot of information out there, right? We all know that if you Google ESOPs, you're going to get, people that have advertised on Google, right? The first one that comes, I'm not going to say it, but you know exactly where you're going to go. And, there's a combination of like, how do I trust that versus this? I think even in our ESOP community, and you can kind of, this is kind of a question and a comment, there are service providers that have a direct axe to grind to like, hey, I want to sell you this, like this thing, this, like, just call it 1042. You got to get a 1042. I had a client meeting this past week where the company was working with somebody, and it's immediately, you got to have a 1042, and we're going to change it from an S to a C. And I asked the question, I'm like, do they do an analysis between an S and a C and compare the two? Or did they just say you got to have a 1042 and be a C? And that's where I get a little bit like wanting to help people to ask the right questions. I'm not trying to say anything negative about anybody, but I want the people listening to say, like, maybe I should do a deeper analysis because I may not want to have the C Corp 1042. That may not be what I want, but I didn't know there was an option, right? So do
Right.
you see that in the world that you live in with like trying to help people get that real unbiased information to so you guys, the company, we just want the company to do the best it can as an ESOP.
Yeah, ultimately, you hit the nail on the head. That is what the state center wants. Is it wants the transaction to be the right transaction for the customer, even if it ends up not being employee ownership. That we go down that path, and then all of a sudden they're just like, you know what? We've done all this. We've looked at it. Thank you for sharing all of that. But after doing all this, I think we're going to go down this path. Now, we don't necessarily try to push them that way. We try to make sure they have all the information. Then when they do go and get the service providers, I think we're very confident in those service providers and technical assistance providers that work with us and are involved in our advisory committees and involved in the state center. It's been pretty fun to see that the ones that continue to support the center, both financially and more importantly, opening up their network, helping us find places to do networking events or educational events, just always being around the center. They're all the service providers that all of us want to work with anyway. It's that same core, and we get some new ones as well that want to start. So we haven't had that problem of having someone come back and say, boy, I don't know, I'm questioning this. But I think we do a really nice job in the state center level of putting them into the right places and pointing them in the right direction. So
No, I think that's helpful. And I like that you guys look at the cooperatives and EOTs just because I've had clients be like, I think I'm going to do an ESOP and I've got a good relationship with the EOT people. I'm like, you're probably better off as an EOT because of the factors that you're thinking about. And so it goes both, it goes different ways, but I think a lot of times people are ESOP. I mean, I'm an ESOP podcaster, so that's of course all I'm talking about ESOPs, but
right.
I also want to be careful to say maybe you are better off as a cooperative or an EOT. Um, because ultimately I just want them to be in the right at the end of the deal. Like I want them to be where they really want to be. And it's education and knowledge of pros and cons that help walk them through that. And again, not having an axe to grind, just really wanting this to be the best thing. So an EOT could be a good option. So, I mean, I don't know how often that happens for you guys. I mean, I know ESOP's probably a lot more popular than something like that. But kind of speak to that a little bit where you see that kind of in the beginning, they're asking questions with your spoke. You're saying, all right, now I've got a resource and they're asking for that. How do you guys guide them through a non-ESOP situation?
Yeah, one of the surprising things to me in the first 5 years is that I'll call it ESOPable. That's the term I use. I don't know if it's a real term or if I'm the first one to use it, but um,
ESOPable, I like it. I'm gonna
a
write it
couple,
down.
a couple, we don't have the statistics yet, but just in general, approximately 60 to 70, I might be overshooting. Let's just say 65% of the companies that actually come to a center and actually do an intake form and work with us, well over 50% of them are not of the size and the revenue to be an ESOP. And so I consider them not ESOPable. So I need another form of employee ownership to point them in. And right now, worker cooperatives, employee ownership trust or EOTs are the other forms, other than maybe, can we help them with a management buyout that could turn into an ESOP down the road if we introduce the concept? The other thing that those businesses are that we're really working hard on is there an ESOP that is in the same industry or that's looking to acquire a company? So if I've got a drywall company that comes in that has 25, 30 workers and just doesn't have the revenue nor maybe the participant count payroll, it's kind of on that fringe. Is there an ESOP company in the construction business that I can introduce them to? And that's a real story that, it didn't happen. I don't know. We've got to check back in with them. But those are the
Yeah.
kinds of solutions that we're trying to provide so that we can keep companies local, keep them open. I mean, that's also the part, something we haven't talked about, which is, we believe that employee ownership in all forms helps communities across the country, it helps every single worker, no matter, where they came from, their high school, their education, their background, color of their skin. I mean, that whole socioeconomic status. We just want to make sure that these jobs are still there. And so we do have resources on worker cooperatives and EOTs, and we spend a lot of time working with that. The other side of that is, and there's really no way to quantify this except for the 5,500 count. We know that our message is being delivered. We know that people are hearing it. What I think is happening is that people are hearing about employee ownership. It's reminding them that they may have known a little bit about it. They should go out and do research, and they're bringing in their own advisors who don't know anything about ESOPs, but then help find another. So they're not coming through the center. They don't feel like they need someone to hold their hand. I'm trying to fix that. So we realize, make them realize, look, come to us. We'll still let you, you still have your advisor and all of that. But just a quick anecdote, just to end that answer, is that the Pennsylvania Center, I think, has been around since 2016. So 7-8 years now. The last count, they went from being 14th or 15th in the country in the creation of ESOPs to second with the 2021 ESOP data.
Wow.
But Kevin in Pennsylvania can look at that list of all the new ESOPs, and he can tell you, there are a lot of them on that list that he's never even talked to. But something's happening in Pennsylvania, and that's what I can point to. It's got to be related to a lot of different things, but I'm sure the Pennsylvania Center has a lot to do with that. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure, right? We know there's a correlation between, like we talked about, Vermont, Ohio, Pennsylvania. This is working. Like people, because they're constantly intentionally talking about the story of an ESOP, and then people come. I think too, it's word of mouth. Like, yeah, the company did it, and then they told their buddy who has another company. Yep. I think
100%.
that's a huge part of it. I think going through advisors that don't understand ESOPs, that's where the barrier is. I think for the most part. Who are people going to listen to? If they're CPA, right? And then CPA doesn't know anything about ESOPs, they're going to be like, I don't really think it's a good option for you. That's the worst thing that can happen, like, because then it's dead for the most part. But that's why we have to all be talking about it as much as we can. When you talk about ESOPable, I like the word, and it's hard because, I mean, everybody's going to say, well, what, as they listen, am I too small to be an ESOP? What does that mean? And I know I'm going to say, you're going to say it depends, right? All the factors. But kind of like if you talked about revenue and EBITDA, where would you draw the line if they were, because I did somebody in North Carolina. It was a 10-person company. They were an S Corp. They only did $2 million of revenue. And we had about $1.5 million. They were very profitable on $1.5 million EBITDA. So it was very small company. I converted them to a C Corp. We got bank financing on it too, which was even more interesting. But so that's like the smallest deal I've done. So I'm just curious, like, because I do think part of our mission is to open the door for sometimes, like, how could that deal get done where some people would say, no way, if it's not this, whatever. So how would you answer that, like, size question? Because I think that's on people's minds all the time.
Yeah, and coming from the third party, or coming from the service provider industry, drawing that line in the sand, nobody wants to. And so I always laugh when someone wants to draw the line, because I know someone's going to call me and tell me I'm crazy. But here's my line. My line in the sand is somewhere between 30 and 40 employees. Well, what makes a good ESOP? Can we do it for lower? Yes. But if I had to draw a line in the sand, I would draw a line in the sand around 30 to 35 employees, and somewhere around $1 million to $1.5 million in net profit or EBITDA. That's the line that I draw, and to say, this is a very loose line, but if I had to draw a line, that's where I'd draw it. But then I followed up with this, and I don't know how many people followed up, but coming from my third-party administration days, I always have to throw this in there. To me, the more important thing is to look at the size of your payroll compared to the value of your company. So if we have a very large payroll and people who have, a lot of the same, it's not a significantly different size payroll where you've got 4 or 5 people making lots and lots of money and then the other 25 not. But if you've got some consistent payroll and you've got decent sized payroll for a smaller size company, that can work. What doesn't work is not a lot of payroll, not a lot of people, and a very high valuation. And people don't talk about that enough, because at its core, an ESOP is We give you a profit sharing contribution each year, and you give it back so we can give you stock. So
Right.
what's that profit sharing contribution going to be to pay the loan payment? We don't want to be given 20-25% of pay profit sharing anymore. We did that back in the 90s. We saw what happened.
Or have like a 200-year inside note or whatever. I know we're talking about inside notes and people are like, what are you talking about? But what's the longest inside note? Like, what would you become? I've seen them, like I had a 55-year inside note, which I thought was really, really long, but I've heard 100-year inside notes. It wasn't my deal, but
Yeah.
I've heard that's been done. What's your take on that? And I'll tell people what inside notes are in a second. So
Those were just starting to come into play as I was leaving the industry, but I was surprised at a 45-year note. So I still hadn't got my arms around even 45 years. So
yeah.
I'm probably still old school and I'm probably way out of date here, but those 25 and 30-year loans was what I was used to. So I'd have to figure that out. I don't have that number, but yeah, I
Well,
wasn't used to the
and
long ones.
25% is benefit is huge. Like, right. So if a 401k match is 4%, it's like nuts to have something that extreme. So for everybody, inside notes are how long the trust in the company, how long the note is between the trust and the company to issue shares. The longer the note, the more time it is that they're going to issue shares. So the shorter the note, the quicker the issuance of shares to employees. But there's IRS code sections, 404, things that you have to do and think through to make sure that you're not jeopardizing. And that, I think your point is really good. I think you have to look at the payroll and the over evaluation, and those can be completely out of whack if you have that. And I think that's another thing that people don't really talk about as much, but we should for sure. So
Yeah.
well, cool. So as we go in, I guess, and we're not gonna have a ton more time, but if somebody goes to a state center meeting that EOX is part of, what should they expect to experience? Like, what if they're brand new to ESOPs and they're like, hey, I'm in that state, you guys are doing your stuff, and what should they expect to experience at those conferences or meetings?
I'm glad you brought that up. Most people don't ask that question and I don't ever get to it, but we started very early on. We had a CEO come to us and tell us that he thought that the sales process for ESOPs was broken. And I had no idea what he's talking about, but he said, I want to meet you at an NCEO conference. I want to tell you why I think this is broken and how you need to fix it. And what he said was, we have to tell this story. We're leading. He said, I just left an ESOP conference, and I won't say which one, but one of the major conferences that we host. He said, I just went to a session that was for prospective companies. And he said, at the end of the session, the people up front had scared the audience so much and had given so many details that somebody literally raised their hand and said, why should I create an ESOP? And he said, we are broken. And so all that being said, all of the meetings that we do that are appropriate, and almost all of them are appropriate, we do not lead with technical details, and we typically do not have service providers as the speakers. The speakers are business owners who have gone through this process before from the state in which they live, and they tell their story. They tell their journey. Look, 6 years ago, I was here. This happened. I was looking for a way to exit. These are the different paths I went down, and this is why I chose employee ownership. And this is what it's done for my company afterwards. Or maybe they're too new and they don't know, but we have those business owners tell their story. And if the business owner or selling shareholder is not available, then we have the CEO, CFO, HR director tell the story that they know and have heard for a long time. And most of those are some of the longer term ESOPs. But when they tell their story, it's amazing how many questions and how much easier it is to get people engaged, and they leave the room not scared, don't have any details, and they want more information, which is what we want. So that's what they can expect, is one or two people that'll be on a panel. I'm headed to Illinois in a couple of weeks to do a panel with the Illinois Rural Affairs Conference. We'll have two ESOP companies from Southern Illinois that'll be on the panel and tell their story about an ESOP. And I know we'll get calls after that. So that's really what those meetings are about. The service providers that bring those clients to the table are always with them. They're always in the audience because there's going to be questions that they can't answer. Gives them the opportunity to answer the question from the audience, and then always gives them always people talking with them and asking more detailed questions. But I think we need to lead with the story, not the details.
I love that. I do, because I I've done like a lot of different episodes, but the ones I love the most are ESOP stories. Like I'll interview the company after the deal's done, or a couple of years. Like, hey, I just did one for a company. We did their ESOP in Texas, and all we talked about was the ESOP committee. Like the company, the employees got to talk on the podcast. So it was like it's just fresh and new, and that's really what people want to hear when you get down to it, because you got to get through all the mumbo jumbo. I always call it ESOP PhD talk. It's like people are
Yeah.
talking PhD level and they're like, I don't even know what you just said, right? But when you talk to a business owner who's done it, they're speaking the same language, and that's way more effective, I think, in the scheme of things. If you're trying to really accomplish the mission of educating,
Yeah,
people.
100%. And then, the details are readily available. I mean, we don't have to wait. You want to talk to us next week about the details of what you heard and why did he say this or what does this mean? And I mean, those getting them interested is exactly what we're trying to do. And it's funny how many of those connections that we make, um, if someone has not come to a seminar with us and they just call us out of the blue, we also make those connections to the business owners right away before we connect them with service providers, or sometimes alongside. It's amazing how many of those, when you do see ESOPs that get created, they talk about the person. How did you find out about employee ownership? Oh, I talked to Ken Baker from New Age Industries, and yeah, after talking to him, I had to look at this thing. He was so excited about it, because that they all get excited. I mean, everybody usually loves what they've done. They see what it happens after they leave the company, or even if they're still in the company. So it's always
Yep.
fun to see those relationships continue on.
No, I agree. And I think that's part of what draws people to love doing what we do, right? I mean, it's a community of people that really with the clients and the other providers too. I mean, it's exciting because it's something that we're all helping. At the end of the day, we're helping people. We're helping communities. We're helping the companies. We're helping the employees. Um, that's one of the best feelings in the world, right? You're doing something that there's a win-win-win involved, and that's gratifying for all of us.
Yeah, and as a third party administrator, the best part of my job that I wish more service providers had the ability, got to participate in. There was two great parts of it. One was statement handout day at the barbecue. I mean, very rarely do they have the ESOP attorney come in, or the trustee, or others that get to witness the excitement. But third party administrator in my job, that was, I absolutely love that. Go out and explain the statement. How do you read it? What does this mean? How did you get more shares? But more importantly, get to see the announcement of how big that balance has got. And then the second piece, we never got to actually hand checks, but on an annual basis with 50 ESOPs, we saw the benefits. We saw the distributions. I mean, we
Yeah,
were,
it's real. This is real.
very involved in it. Distribution paperwork, getting the participant to call us. I mean, all of that. I mean, that's if it gets real then. I mean, if
Yeah.
you go out and do statement day for 15 years and see these people and know who they are, and then actually get to send the check in the mail to them, was, yeah, I just wish I could have hand delivered some of those checks. Now that I look back at it, you really see the impact on what that's all about.
That's cool. Well, I appreciate you doing what you're doing, Steve. So keep it up. If somebody is looking at, hey, how do I get more information from EOX? We direct them to your website, or
Yeah,
what's your.
so eoxnetwork.org, eoxnetwork.org. On there, there'll be a pull-down menu that says state centers, and you can find a map of all the state centers, the 21 state centers across the country. They have clickable links directly to the state center. And then you can, if you want to talk to somebody in your state, or you want to talk to me and get guided to a state, or, we've kind of paused on opening state centers tiny bit here this last 18 months, because build it and they will come, and now I got to support it. And so doing a little bit of that now, but if you're interested in opening a state center, I'm always open to talk, and tell you what it takes to get a center up and running. We've got some new activity just in this last month in West Virginia and Alabama. So stay tuned. I can't guarantee anything, but I have a feeling you're going to see two new state centers in the next 12 to 18 months, at least in those two states. So yeah, happy to talk to anybody about that, or business owners, which is probably more of your audience. Yeah, happy to always take a call. Even if there is a state center, just give me a call, shoot me an email.
Perfect. Cool. Well, thank you, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. Any final words of wisdom for ESOP people, or as we sign off?
I think the final words of wisdom is just please allow us to have employee ownership at the table. That's all I can ask for. It's
Perfect.
not right for everybody, but if we could just get it on the table, yeah, we would change that number from 225 or so new ESOPs a year before I leave this job, I want that number to be well over 300 a year, and then I can feel like I've started a revolution here, a movement. So
I love it. Cool, Steve. Thank you for your time today. And for everybody else, thank you for listening, and we will see you on our next step on this journey to an ESOP.